Hey everybody. Before starting today's episode, I just wanted to provide some information that might be useful when listening. The subject of this episode says multiple times a specific name, and that name is Michael Pollan. Michael Pollan is an author who has written many books, including The Botany of Desire and The Omnivore's Dilemma, and his most recent book, How to Change Your Mind, is a book about psychedelics and their use in the therapeutic setting. Today's subject talks about Michael Pollan, or at least refers to him multiple times, and when he does this, he's talking about Michael Pollan, his book, and the interviews that Pollan was a part of while he was touring to promote his book release. So as you listen today, just keep that in mind, and hopefully if you didn't know who Michael Pollan is, maybe you'll be a little bit interested and potentially pick up his book, and you won't be so lost while listening to today's episode. All right, enjoy.
So I'm primarily a photographer, but I do video, lots of multimedia stuff, and then I've kind of branched off into sculpture and assembly as well.
Do you have a place where people could go? Would you care to share that?
Yeah, I've got a website. It's just my name, which is chrisfitzgerald.com. And that's like commercial photography. That's mostly fashion and portraiture. But you can see, like, I've worked on a web series, and that's on there, and some kind of artsy videos are there too.
What inspired you to start that?
I've just kind of always been an artsy kid. I had the ability to draw kind of from a young age, and I tattooed for a while, and then I really got interested in photography and went to school and liked sculpture, so I did sculpture too. Just always had my hand in it. I always into like writing or drawing or something, you know. I really like taking things that are upsetting or disturbing or grotesque in some way, and then trying to make them beautiful and vice versa. So I like the push me away, pull me back in feeling looking at art, where it's like disturbing or it's off in some way, but it still attracts you, like you can't look away.
Psychotropic presents Chris.
So I just moved here with my wife a couple months ago. I'm an artist, and I'm unemployed. And I've been trying to like find other artists and stuff, and I came from LA, which is like, it has this huge kind of thriving creative community, and you don't really have to work for it. You know, what I found in Seattle is a little more insular, and so more difficult to kind of get things going. I had just listened to this NPR podcast about using psilocybin mushrooms to combat depression. Apparently there's this whole history of psychedelics being used to treat mental illnesses. And then there was kind of this moral breakdown during like the hippie generation. And so they outlawed it. You know, they were like, oh, this is going to, you know, people are going to go crazy and there'll be a government uprising and, you know, all this kind of stuff. So they just put like all these reports and everything and all this work that they'd done, they just threw it all away basically.
Why are you interested in that?
I have been suffering depression for my whole life. I'm 39. I've had, I guess, they talk about it like cancer. I guess my form of depression, like it goes into remission, so you're never really free of it. I've had a few episodes of remission, but it's something I just really battle out nearly every day. And I've had a multitude of treatments. I've done clinical trials for kind of experimental things and really haven't had any marked success. So when I heard Poland's interview, and he was talking about how these trips that you would go on, you can sort of reset your inner dialogue or reset your ego. That was really interesting to me because a lot of what I get into is negative self-talk or these stories that we tell ourselves. I will never succeed because of this, or I'm ugly, or I'm a loser. And so you tell yourself that story, which actually prevents you from, it prevents you from forward progress, really. So psilocybin mushrooms, they were finding that it was allowing people to reset those stories, tell themselves different stories.
These are conversations you have in your head, like that negative self-talk, correct?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Do you suspect that that's kind of unique, that really only people with depression suffer from that, or do you think that's kind of an everyday, every person sort of occurrence?
I would say that our brains, I read this thing that was like, basically your brain is just a thing that finds problems and then works on solving those problems. And so I feel like everyone probably has that voice. And since we don't really know where thoughts come from and where that kind of ego voice comes from, I feel like we all probably have it, but I think some people are better at saying, no, that's not true, or, I don't necessarily believe that I'm overweight, or, those things like that. They're able to combat that. I think I have a very strong inner voice that is very hard for me to ignore, if that answers your question.
Would you mind describing kind of a situation where you think you were impeded by this?
Yeah, I would say that anytime I have, as an artist or looking for a job or having to sell myself, you usually have to talk to people or kind of pitch an idea to people. And there's often just a constant, like, you're never going to succeed. This is never going to work. No one's going to like you. No one's going to like your art. You're never going to work. Your wife's going to divorce you. You're going to live under a bridge. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And so I think those things, that voice, when you need that confidence, when you need confidence the most to like pull that up, go to that meeting, it's just beating you down,
So like, I hear you saying that, and honestly, like, I can totally relate. I get a similar voice too. It was with me kind of all through college. But the thing that I always kind of kept thinking about, or that I started to kind of, I feel like I realized, was that voice was pushing me. Like, oh, I'm not going to be good enough. Okay, I have to do the best that I can then to at least mask it, to at least like, I have to try to overcome that barrier that I keep telling myself I can't overcome. Would you say, as an artist, that's kind of what's happening with you, or do you experience something different?
It's different. I feel like they're just different coaching styles. Like, a good coach will know when they have to challenge a player and then when they have to sort of build a player up, so there's one manner of coaching is like kind of the drill sergeant, you're embarrassing me, get out there, you can do better than this. And there's the other kind that's like, that was a great shot earlier and you can, but I know you've got more. You've got whatever, I don't watch sports, so I don't really know, but that coaching aspect of like, there's a time to scream and then there's a time to build you up. And I feel like mine is, I just don't respond well to that kind of coaching.
Have you used psilocybin to help with this?
No, I'm on medication now for, just a psychotropic medication that's been prescribed. I haven't used the psilocybin. I've looked for research, but I haven't been able to find a trial to get into. I did take LSD a few times as a teenager, but not for medication. It was a recreational usage.
What did you experience with that, specifically in the way it relates to what we're talking about?
I felt like the first time I didn't do a lot. I did like half of a hit of LSD with a girlfriend, and it was just like pure joy, basically. It was not a lot of like introspection to it. A few times later I did it, and there was this sense of unhappiness with who I was. Like I wasn't living up to my full potential. And I did feel like I was like 16, so it was 15 maybe. So I don't know, your sort of self-awareness isn't at its peak there, but I did have this really strong sense that I was unhappy. I was unhappy with like the sort of life I was living, and that I wanted some kind of big change. I needed some kind of big change. And it's sort of regretful now because I'm much older, but I feel like I sort of wasted those opportunities with LSD. Like I would be way better served taking it as an adult and sort of understanding myself better and understanding that inner journey better.
So would you say that experience was beneficial to you, or was it actually a hindrance? Did that actually plant a seed in your mind?
No, I think it was beneficial. I mean, I was having a lot of problems at home with my parents. I was a pretty rebellious kind of punk rock kid. My parents were not doing great with that. So there was this overall sensation that I was unhappy and that there was a potential for me to be and do better and be happier, if that makes sense. And it was like just a very profound thought of you can change for the better. It was like, I don't know how to describe it, but I think the LSD, there were two trips that I remember, and I'd gone to see music, but there were two trips that I remember where they were just, it was like confirming this hypothesis that I had. And the LSD was like, yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. If that makes sense.
The hypothesis being that like, hey, I need to better, like I need to strive for more, or I can
yeah,
get
like
better
things
with
need
myself.
to change. Yeah, exactly. I need to better myself. Things need to change.
What did you do with that?
I don't know if I did anything. I mean, I was 15, so my kind of your options are pretty limited there as far as your ability to make like permanent changes. And that's kind of one of my regrets is like sort of wasting that journey at that age, because anything that you come up with, you can't really do anything with. I can't go, hey, mom and dad, I took acid and I need some shit to change. So it was sort of, you're still stuck. Even though you have that information, I was still stuck.
You had mentioned earlier that you're currently on like a psychotropic medication.
Yeah.
For depression?
Yeah, so I'm taking lithium and a drug called nortriptyline, which is one of the older antidepressants.
Can you describe a little bit how that impacts you?
I would say that these two drugs particularly make me kind of dull, and I've taken nearly, I'd say like 85% of the drugs that have been available. I've taken medication for like the last 22 years. Yeah, they just rounds off the edges. I wish I could be more specific, but I just don't have strong feelings about anything. You know what I mean? It's just...
I think so. I've had one experience with lithium. I worked with a girl who she had it, and I wanted to try it recreationally, just because ultimately Nirvana has a song called Lithium.
Yeah.
And yeah. I was like, oh, I wonder what that's about. And I took it, and I remember like it wasn't necessarily like this high that I wanted to seek again. You know, it was definitely, there was a psychotropic effect, but it wasn't something that I yearned to try again.
How did you do it? Did you do like a one big dose, or?
It was just a pill. I popped a pill.
I don't love it. I mean, I've been on medication that I responded, I think, better to, but it's what I'm on, you know, and it's, as far as medications, it's just a salt. Like it's a mineral. It's on the periodic table, you know. It's nothing too crazy, but yeah, it does just sort of kind of round you off. I don't know.
How does that affect your relationship?
She is very patient. I mean, if you have a partner and you're going through this, I mean, it takes a really, I think, strong person to be with someone like me. I remember listening to, this is another NPR thing about a woman who was getting LSD like from the dark web, and she was taking it like herself, like microdosing for her depression. And she was describing it. She was a journalist. I think it was in San Francisco. And this was about a year and a half ago. It kind of got me interested in this. But she said she had this sort of depression where she could hear her husband eating almonds in the next room, and it made her like want to flip a table over. Where it feels like sometimes the only emotions I have are just terrible, terrible emotions. Like things like that where you just, all of a sudden you hate this person for eating almonds. You know, I feel like whatever medication I'm on or whatever, or a person is on, I feel like you have to have a really strong partner that can deal with it.
And she's pretty strong. She's able to kind of deal with whatever you have to dish out.
Yeah, she's great. I mean, I had electroshock treatment at the end of last year, and that's a thing. It's like 3 months of being kind of in the hospital. So she was put in the role of my caretaker, which is, you know, stressful for both parties, but she was also like brought into that sort of medical circle. So all of a sudden people are saying, this is what's going on. This is what's going on with your husband. He's going to act like this. It was like this, all of a sudden she's kind of in the inner circle of what being depressed is like. And I think if you're with somebody who doesn't have depression, sometimes it's really hard to understand. So I think talking to the doctors, talking to therapists and counselors and stuff, I think that really helped her.
It seems like these treatments that you're undergoing, like with lithium, truthfully, the girl who gave me a dose of her lithium, she had attempted suicide several months before, right? And you talking about lithium, and that's really the only context I have to put it in. And then you're talking about electroshock, which is really kind of invasive. I don't know if that's the right word, but that's what I'm going to use. Was there something that happened that brought you to have to undergo these treatments?
Yeah, I just, you know, my mom told me once when I was younger, she's like, you're just never going to be one of those shiny, happy people. And that's, at first, it like really hurt my feelings, but, you know, she was right. Like I was never going to be this, just like a smiley, like completely positive person. There are people like that. They're naturally like that. I'll never be like that. But in 2017, I was just really suffering. Things just got worse and worse and worse. And I was going to therapy. I was going to a psychiatrist. I was getting medication. And I started doing TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. So I did 9 weeks of that. And towards the end, like had some results. I don't know how much you know, but they move the magnet around your head in a couple different areas. So like if it's not working in one place, they can try another place. So by the end, it was kind of starting to work, but my insurance ran out. And I don't know, like I just took this nosedive, and I don't know any other way to say it, but I kind of quit showering and quit changing clothes and kind of gave up and started reading a little bit about electroshock. And I was in LA. So UCLA has a really good psychiatric program, and I was doing TMS at UCLA already. And so that I was able to kind of transition from that to ECT. I'm not suicidal. I mean, I do think about death a lot. I just do. I think about suicide a lot. I'm not like a suicidal person, if that makes sense. But it just was such a dark place, and all I could think about was like death and suicide and how I was meaningless and I had no hope. And ECT was kind of like okay, it's time to pull out the big guns.
How does depression influence your art?
So at the end of I went back to school at 28 to get a photography degree, and I did my senior thesis on portraying sadness as this siren figure. Like depression was this kind of addictive, sexy thing, and how depression would kind of grab you and hold you. And there was like the security of being sad, because sadness is reliable in a way that it feels like other emotions might not be. So I did this whole series of kind of grotesque images, people crying, lots of kind of like distortions of the flesh and things like that, but they were all with a strong like erotic undertone to them. And that's kind of where it exists now. And in doing portraits and things and like wanting people to be who they are in that moment to the camera, I think there's an authenticity there that I really like. I would say that also depression is just, because it's kind of always there, it affects your process maybe more than your outcome. Right now I've got a bunch of ideas that I've sort of half started, and the ideas I think are good, but like doing the work it's really been hard to do lately. I just can't seem to get motivated to do it. And so I kind of have these like half started things, or these half ideas that I think have a lot of potential and promise, but then I just can't get off my ass to do the work. So I think that answers your question, basically, that I do work that's based on depression, and then there's also depression that's fighting me all the time, that I feel like prevents me from doing work.
Are you using any substances right now other than what you're being prescribed?
I'm not. Right before I got on lithium, I was experimenting with THC and CBD. And I had a little bit of success there. I was doing, I'd say like microdosing, like 5 milligrams of THC. I don't know what like a real person would take, but I was pretty sensitive to it. So I would have like a 5 milligram espresso bean or something like that. And then I was doing like 15 to 1 CBD to THC vaping. And I felt like just an overall calming effect that I had. Part of me like wanted to use it like alcohol, basically, like a recreational drug. And then part of me was like, maybe I should use this, because I'd heard about people using marijuana for anxiety and for depression and things like that. I tended to get anxious on it, which is not a thing I enjoyed. I tend to overthink it a little bit. You can kind of get in your own head. I did some research with like, I always like to check drug interactions, but it said that a lot of people who are taking lithium and smoking weed had really negative effects. So they had panic attacks, basically. I'm not sure if this is just internet lore, but I was like, I'm not really into that. But there were like an overwhelming amount of stories of like, I was taking lithium, I smoked some weed, and I got really upset. So yeah, I've put that off for now.
You noticed that happening in yourself, or that was just a fear of?
No, I didn't do it with lithium because of what I've read. I am still drinking with lithium and nortriptyline, just recreational. But yeah, what was I doing? Let's see. I think I was taking Wellbutrin and maybe something else. I'm pretty sure I was on Wellbutrin and experimenting with THC at the time, because nothing was working. And this was before I did ECT, but like nothing was working for me. And I was like, I'm just going to try this because I've tried everything else.
And so now you have your sights kind of set on psychedelics, specifically psilocybin, it sounds like. Can you describe how you imagine those psilocybin sessions to be?
Like how the journey that I would take? Is that what you're asking? Like what my personal inner journey would be?
Well, no, one physically, like what do you imagine that to be like? Because it sounds like you've gone to therapy before. Like you're seeing a psychiatrist, or you saw a psychiatrist. And that was a certain type of experience. What do you imagine the psilocybin-assisted therapy to be like?
I guess I'm painted because I heard Michael Pollan's explanation of it, of, having like 2 guides and then having, usually some headphones and dark sunglasses and a dark room. So it's really focused on you going inside. And I think if I was going to do it, I would really want the other people there to kind of guide me, some people who were experienced.
What do you imagine that guiding to be like?
I think supportive and reassuring and calming. I had a bad acid trip, and it was my last acid trip, and because it was so bad, it was my last one. And if I could never do that again, that would be great. Like I was 15 or 16, and I'm 39 now, and I'm still kind of terrified of how bad that trip was. So while I get like really excited about the idea of mushrooms and kind of resetting your brain, I also know the other side of that.
Can you describe that experience?
I was friends with a dealer, and we had like half a sheet of acid. I'd gone on a few trips by now, so I was confident, and I took like a dose and a half, like a tab and a half. And like an hour passed, I started to feel great. And what's better than feeling great? Feeling extra great. So I ate another hit of acid, and then I don't know, it was like an hour later, I was just like, I don't really feel good, and I think I'm freaking out. And I was with my buddy, and man, it was just like 8 hours of misery after that. I mean, thinking I was gonna die, thinking I was never gonna be normal again, thinking I was just gonna trip forever, that this was my life from now on. Also, everything was melting. Like, we had rented some movies from Blockbuster, and we were gonna like watch them, like Nightmare Before Christmas and Aladdin and like all these like really visually exciting movies, and I couldn't watch television. Everything was melting. It was just like nothing was still. Everything was just dissolving, and just wasn't ready for it. And it's also one of my regrets, because it really ruined that for me, and I just don't think I was mentally ready for anything like that. I think I was having a panic attack. And a lot of times when you have a panic attack, like like people call ambulances and stuff, and they're like, I'm dying, I'm having a heart attack. And it's just your brain. Like your brain is telling you, I think it's usually you release too much adrenaline into your bloodstream, and you sort of, your heart's racing and it's hard to breathe and your chest is tight, so you think you're having a heart attack. But it's just like a pretty common, I think when you're having a panic attack, it's a pretty common feeling of like, oh, I'm going to die. Because you're having these physical symptoms that are awful. Tight chest, can't breathe. Like you're always in survival mode, basically. So you're just like, why is this happening? I have to breathe. I must be dying. Also, I'm still at my parents' house because I'm only 15 or 16. And we're in the living room, and I'm just like, I tell my friend, I'm like shaking, and like my teeth are chattering. And I'm like, you cannot wake up my parents, like no matter what happens, and like all this shit's happening, and also like I'm gonna be so dead if my parents find out I fucking took acid in their living room, that's just dumb shit you do when you're a kid, I guess.
Do you think that influenced your mindset now?
Absolutely. When I was listening to that Michael Pollan talk about mushrooms, which I've never done, I've only done LSD, I was immediately like terrified. I was immediately like, oh, I'd love to do this, but I'm so afraid of panicking.
I guess specifically, do you think that it influenced your mindset regarding that voice in your head that says, oh, I can't do this, I'm too ugly, I'm not smart enough, etc.?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. There's definitely, I think I definitely tell myself stories, and that's one of the stories is like, you can't do drugs because you'll have a panic attack. That is a story I tell myself all the time. And so tripping and like psychedelics and opening up your own mind and sort of expanding your brain, like these are things that are really exciting to me. And I have been held back by that experience.
Can you describe to me what you think will happen in this psychedelic-assisted therapy internally?
I don't know. I would like to think that the visual or dreamlike experience that I have is related, or I can relate it to my suffering of depression, and that somehow I can reverse that, or that there's this, I could come to terms with it in a way that, I don't know how, if you got to this part in the book, but Michael Pollan's talking about people taking psychedelics for end of life, like fear of death. And this guy has this huge fear of death. He takes it and he's like, oh, I saw my own consciousness in this field. And I understood that my consciousness would go on and everything was okay. And so that's kind of a metaphorical, like he had this fear of death. He had this metaphorical experience in his brain. And I think that's what I would like, but I don't know how to describe that metaphorical experience to you. I would just like to, it's a journey I haven't had yet, so I can't tell you about it.
So let's say, hypothetically, you find one of these psychedelic studies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can actually get into a psychedelic-assisted therapy. How do you feel about the idea of that affecting your artistic style?
I thought that possibly my depression would go away, like I would be in sort of a remission or whatever. But it's kind of always been here, and I don't have a lot of hope for it to go away. And so, like, even with the psychedelics, I think it's always going to be a question of me trying to live around my depression. You know, if I was just to say, like, oh, this is what I hope for, you know, just my fantasy, it would be that it would unlock the parts of my brain that are sort of like stuck gears. So if I think about art, or if I think about possibility, or if I think about how parts of the universe connect to me and those around me, I would hope that it loosens those gears and just allows those thoughts to be more freely flowing. And I think what got me excited about this Michael Pollan book was he's talking about like the id, or the kind of active voice in your brain. And there's this idea that, like, that's not you. Like, the voice that's talking in your head is not necessarily you, that there's something underneath that that's kind of a pure form of you. And psychedelics in this study have seemed to separate that talking voice from the authentic voice. And that was really exciting to me, because I constantly hear that chatter in my head of, like, you're not good enough, you're never going to be anything, and you're a failure. There's no reason for you to start this project because no one's going to look at it, et cetera, et cetera. It's just like on and on and on. And so if I could be able to hear the other voice underneath that, that's the true me, that would be amazing. I would pay a lot of money for that. You know.
It seems like that bad LSD experience did influence your present state, at least when considering undergoing another psychedelic experience. Yet, even though it produced a negative experience that has, in some ways, persisted to now, you still want to attempt it. I guess what you are potentially pursuing could, to me, be likened to jumping off a cliff, breaking your leg, and then jumping off another cliff in an attempt to mend that broken leg. What are your thoughts on that?
So I'll tell you something that I've told very few people in my life, but I had a bad trip when I was 14 or 15, I think. From that moment on, for the next 15 years, I was terrified of somebody putting acid in my drink, to the point where if I left my drink, like a Sprite or something that was open, and if I turned away from it for too long, no matter who I was with, like I could be with my mother, I would throw it away. I had a phobia of being dosed. There was also, this was kind of a time where I had heard about that happening to people, like urban legends, you know? I was terrified. And then that sort of went away, and that, like, the logic of that and the likelihood of that I saw as, like, you know, not being very probable. And then just an overall sort of fear of panic attacks. And like we talked about last time, I had this kind of major panic attack during that. So yeah, even now, and even smoking marijuana now, I can think myself into an anxious state, you know, of like just the fear of being out of control, the fear of losing control. So yeah, to answer your question, I'm terrified of it. The other part of that, and we talked about this, is like I was super young. I didn't have a good support system around me. The way that this is happening now, it sounds like it is very controlled with, you know, experts by your side that can help you if you get in a bad space. Also with psilocybin mushrooms as opposed to LSD, it seems like a completely different experience, and one that's been so positive for the people that I've heard of it happening to, that it's hard for me not to get excited about it. There's another part of me that just is stubborn, and I want to face my fears, and I'm a person that does that usually over and over and over. So if I see something I'm scared of, I really try to attack it head on. And this is one of those things.
This episode was produced by me, Philip Johnson. Music was written, produced, and generously donated by Vox Mod. Look for his music on Spotify, iTunes, and voxmod.com. A list of all songs used can be found in the description section of this episode. If you liked what you heard today, please subscribe. Also, leave a review. I'd really appreciate it. Lastly, if you have a story and you'd like to share it, I'd love to hear it. You can email me at psychotropicpodcast@hotmail.com. Thanks again, everybody. See you next time.